Welcome to Solved, the political discussion show for people with attention spans and those looking to develop one. My name is Jay, and our other resident solvers are Amanda, Deon, and Erin, who will offer a greeting now.
Hey there.
Hello.
How's it going?
Collectively, we produce the venerable, indispensable, not to mention award-winning podcast, Best of the Left, where humans, that's us, curate progressive media on a chosen topic, creating episodes that are greater than the sum of their parts. On this show, we use those same curation skills to pull together stories and ideas that help us solve some of society's biggest problems, because if we don't tell you how to think, someone dumber on the internet will. Today, we'll be discussing how often and how thoroughly the left is right about stuff generally, because it's like a point that we should probably make more often. Here's a quick preview of things that essentially only progressives of their day believed first before everyone else eventually caught on. Going back a ways, abolition of slavery, banning child labor, women's suffrage, universal civil rights, protesting the Vietnam War, opposing South African apartheid, opposing the Iraq War, supporting marriage equality, fighting against inequality, and for economic populism as a bulwark against Trumpism, the idea that Biden obviously shouldn't have run for a second term, plus his cognitive decline that was on display for everyone, the threat to abortion rights and the fall of Roe v. Wade that was absolutely inevitable if we kept electing Republican presidents, Israel's genocide in Gaza, and warnings about Trump's fascist aspirations going back at least a decade. And that is definitely not an exhaustive list, but it's a solid list.
Yeah, I was going to say labor rights in there as well.
So child labor was mentioned specifically, but labor rights more broadly, of course. Yeah, I can't believe we skipped over that. Yeah, so we're starting as sort of a framework with this article that we'd read this before, and I think it's been mentioned maybe in a show, but Current Affairs a while ago wrote, "The left is always right too early." And what this article does is, in a sense, sort of does in a lot more detail what we just said, like here's a list of things that the left was right about. But then critically, I think it explains why. It's not that we're lucky. It's not that we have a magic 8-ball or whatever. There's an actual reason. And so we're going to get to that. But here's what the article says, quote, "From slavery and child labor in the 19th century to the Iraq War and Gaza, the left position has been accepted only after horrible human costs. Next time, how about listening before the damage is done?" And I think that's our thesis today. Like, the point is not to brag and pat ourselves on the back. The point is, if the left is traditionally correct about things before the rest of society, maybe the left should be given more credence than we traditionally are so that we can avoid horrific suffering, damage along the way.
I was having a conversation with my brother the other day before I even knew what we were going to talk about today. And he said, it sucks seeing what you thought was going to happen. And I think that's the feeling that I'm having on a regular basis. There's no solace in being right about something horrible happening. It's
Right.
not a good feeling because like, I told you so, told you fascism. That's not fun. It'd be cool to skip that part. This could happen. Let's not do it so we don't do it. That would be nice at some point in the
That'd
future.
be better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think leftists are also painted with this smugness. And like kind of as Deon said, there's no joy to be had in being right, especially when no one's giving the arguments or like giving you space to make the argument against, whatever, invading Venezuela, for example. So like to me, the feeling that gets created when you have a thought that something's going to happen and then it happens is the feeling of helplessness. Now, I don't think we're truly without actions that we can take, but I think, the systems that be are always pushing back against, the leftist perspective. And I think we'll get into that later, but the dismissiveness that comes about. Like, there is no smugness that I have about being right. It is only feeling helpless because we knew this was going to happen. And now that it's happening, like, what is there to do?
Absolutely. Yeah. I was going to bring up the smugness as well, because I was like, I'm sure even people on the left listening to this might be like, oh, you're going to talk about all the times you were right just to rub it in everyone's face. Like, no, there's no good feeling from that. This is not, betting on something that's completely innocuous. Like, this is people's lives that we're talking about. So there is no ability to act like this is some kind of game, because it is fucking not.
On that note, real quick, there's a channel I really enjoy on YouTube, a historical channel, and it was talking about how men end up becoming fascist historically. And the guy that does the channel, I'm not going to shout him out right now because I'm going to trash him. But he said, that the left are obviously insufferable, ... and then went on and just didn't explain it. It was just out there as that's just a fact. We're insufferable. Meanwhile, went on to talk about how these people, start following Nick Fuentes and Tucker Carlson, like the most insufferable people in the world.
Right.
Like, wait, I don't understand this disconnect. Is it because they feel bad about us having been right eventually? I don't know what that is, but the default position that we are insufferable. Don't want to
Yeah.
be, not trying to be, would just prefer that we didn't do the bad things.
So I got to be honest, I'm feeling a little bit like the odd one out, because the fact that we've been right about everything that's happening for a decade or more, it's like the one thing I have to hang on to. I'm like, well, at least we saw it coming. So number one, I can feel good about like, okay, I wasn't full of shit. We were right to warn everyone. And number two, I'm not surprised. And if I had to witness all of this and I was surprised, that would be worse. And so, I mean, all of you mentioned like, this isn't something we take joy in. And that's right. I mean, joy is not the right word, but like some sort of satisfaction or something. Like it's the Cassandra effect. I mean, on one hand, it's torture to not be believed. And on the other, it's like, well, at least I was proven to myself, if to no one else, that I wasn't full of shit. I don't know, there's something.
I mean, I guess you could say your morals are aligned and everyone else had to catch up. The best I can say is like, oh, good, I have values. That's about as far as I can go.
I mean, I agree that I
Yeah.
think we almost have to have fun with it because it's exhausting and frustrating to be like, hey, here are my concerns. Oh, you leftist, you insufferable, know it all, da 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 da. And then we are right. We're still insufferable and know it all. So I guess, Jay, maybe your perspective is the healthy one. Maybe we should have more fun with being insufferable know it alls. Like embrace the identity.
Well, so I was going to walk the line actually and be like, I don't know quite how to describe it, but something akin to perverse pleasure or solace. I think solace is maybe the best I have, is like taking some solace in the fact that I was right, but I don't make it part of my core identity and have that be what we talk about on the show every week, or topics for Best of the Left, or like, let's just talk about how right we are. That's not my instinct either.
Yeah. On the point, Dan, you're asking kind of like rhetorically, probably like, what is this about us being insufferable to the right? And I think it touches on something much deeper. They think we're insufferable because we give a shit. And the outcomes like really, really matter to us. And it absolutely makes a difference to not just our beings, but like our mental health, about whether or not the world is pointed in the right direction to lift people up instead of push them down. And the right doesn't really give a shit about that, it seems, at least this version of the right that we're living with right now. And so, of course, we're insufferable because we're telling them there are limits, there are guardrails, there are boundaries, there are things you shouldn't do to people, and they don't want to hear that. So that's insufferable to them. And of course, reveals their lack of humanity at the same time.
I'm going to layer on top of that and say, based on, longtime viewers and listeners know that I read the Babylon Bee, the conservative, satirical, whatever they call themselves, to get some insight into kind of like where they're coming from. I don't have an example handy, but I have seen multiple times framings of stories and jokes that they're telling that indicate to me, like really clearly flashing lights, that they know that the left is right.
Mm-hmm.
They know. and are annoyed that the left is right. And layering what Amanda just said is that's what they find annoying because they don't want to be constrained. They don't want to have to
Yep.
give a shit about other people. They want to be able to do what feels good, not what they kind of subtly recognize would probably be more ethical. But oh God, stop telling me what's ethical. And that is actually the tension. That is the frustration for them, is that fundamentally they know the left is right and they just don't want that to be true. That's what I think.
Yep.
They do have to spend a lot of time lying about what they believe
Yep.
because you don't lie unless you know that you're wrong, right? That's
Yeah.
what people lie for.
Or building extravagant structures to make what they believe somehow true, even though it could
Yeah.
crumble instantly if you
Yeah.
touched it, you know?
Rationalization, but totally hollow, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so the article goes on and explains kind of like how this happens. So it says, quote, in case after case, whether the issue is war, labor, feminism, the rights of minorities, or basic electoral politics, the people who accurately observe the situation and propose the correct solution are socialists, anarchists, and other varieties of committed leftists. At first, they're loudly condemned for it. Then, after a period of years or decades, it finally becomes permissible for centrists and liberals to admit what the leftists had concluded. They attempt to appropriate the left wing position for themselves with the serial numbers filed off and the content watered down. Today's radical fringe becomes tomorrow's common sense just in time for the cycle to start up again. Which, I mean, I've been paying attention long enough that certainly rings true to me. And so now, I mean, skipping past all the wads of examples we could wade through, here's why leftists are better at coming to correct conclusions faster. It says, quote, now, why are leftists correct so consistently? It's not because we have crystal balls tucked away in our cupboards, just the opposite. It's because, by and large, socialists and anarchists don't have the inch-thick layer of bullshit covering our eyes that liberals and conservatives do. Leftists understand that politics is primarily a struggle for control over wealth and resources. It consists of labor, money, land, power, and violence, not abstract ideals, slogans, and mythologies. The technical term is historical materialism, but it really just means facing material reality without a lot of ideological junk in the way. And if you don't have that, you wind up running down all kinds of blind alleys, end quote. And the bit about an inch thick layer of bullshit covering your eyes reminded me, we live in a very polarized society. Not many people have friends across the ideological aisle. That includes me. And so what I do instead is I end up having a lot of fantasy conversations with conservatives. It's like, if I were to ever meet a conservative, here's a conversation I'd love to have with them. I think it was sort of right in the wake of Charlie Kirk's murder. And, there was a lot of talk about the influence of Christianity and conservatism and how he bridged that and infused his Christianity into his conservatism. And so I had one of my fantasy conversations with a conservative purely in my own head. And I thought about how I would explain that my ideology is I want to reduce suffering, period. The end, and like everything flows from that. And I don't have other stuff in the way. I want to reduce people's suffering, everyone's, and then however it is possible to do that, I am willing to explore it. And I imagined this hypothetical conservative responding, oh yeah, like that sounds good to me too. I like to reduce suffering as well. And so we just have to start with the fact that my religion is completely correct. And from that premise, we figure out how to reduce suffering. And since my religion says that first comes God, then man, then woman, then the way to reduce suffering is for everyone to get in their proper place. I'm just like, hold on. That's a big premise you put in front of your train of logic. You think you might end up in the wrong place doing that? Or like, you think you might have artificially narrowed your scope a little bit? That is that inch thick layer of bullshit that clouds perspectives and leads you to a place where, the trad wives are trying to rebel against capitalism, run into the arms of patriarchy and are like, oh no, this didn't work either. And now they all have regrets because they're being abused by their conservative husbands. It's like, come on, dude, we've been over this. Let's dial down the ideology and find things that actually work.
Sometimes there's many miles of bullshit. Like, the big issue is that if your idea is, I want to reduce suffering for all people, and someone says, great, I agree with you, but they don't believe that everyone is fully human, which I think is a huge part of what we're dealing with, then that right there is the starting point for them and you are off to drastically different solutions. And I do believe Charlie Kirk specifically, I'm glad you brought him up, didn't believe everyone's fully human. Not everyone should have the same rights of humanity. And that's why he's a hero to all the fascists who don't believe that everyone is fully human. And when you start with that as your guiding philosophy, well, of course, all this other stuff actually kind of makes sense. Yeah, I mean, not everybody's a person.
Yeah, and of course, they don't realize that creating an underclass won't make life good for them either. But
Right.
Might have to come up with a secondary solution for that underclass they create.
20 minutes in, guys, come on.
Got dark quick.
All right, let's dial it back from fascism to just harp on neoliberals for a little bit. Just this is more like a reminder, right? This is going back to January of last year, 2025. And this is when James Carville, Rahm Emanuel, who was an Obama era White House chief of staff, and a deeply centrist, right leaning columnist, David Brooks, all said basically the same thing. So Slate just sort of like pulled all these together and summarized. James Carville said, we must be on the offensive with a wildly popular and populist economic agenda. Go big, go populist. Stick to economic progress. Rahm Emanuel said around the same time, Dems have squandered years of opportunities to leverage populist anger and convey to voters that the party was on their side. And the deeply centrist columnist David Brooks said, maybe the Democrats have to embrace a Bernie Sanders-style disruption, something that will make people like me feel uncomfortable. All of which sounds great right when it was too late to do any good, because previously, David Brooks wrote a column in February 2020 called No, Not Sanders, Not Ever. And it described Sanders' populism as a program of rage and bitter and relentless polarization that would destroy the Democratic Party and possibly the entire national project of the United States. To which I say that is an incredibly accurate description of exactly the wrong populist movement that was ascendant at the time. In 2020, also, Rahm Emanuel conducted a press tour specifically to try to undermine Sanders, denouncing the Vermont senator and his supporters for, quote, making pledges that will never, ever be realized in people's lives, which reminds me of the, ideological junk framing. It's like, why? Is America not capable of doing great things? Like, what's your premise for why we can't do economic populism? We've done it before. We've lived, not people today, but we as a country lived through FDR's New Deal era, the populist era of having government do big things. So what's the argument for why we can't possibly do that now? And then Carville, also 2020, called Sanders an ideologue and a communist, denounced his plan for making college free, and said that nominating him for president would be a disaster for the party's chances down ballot. And all it took was them being so deeply wrong that they helped elect a fascist by pushing the wrong opposition candidate through the Democratic Party. And then they're like, oh, well, yeah, that guy who's been right for like 10 years, maybe we should have gone that way.
So at the end of the day, the elites are the elites. It doesn't really matter their apparent political affiliation. And I do think people are finally, slowly, but are finally starting to wake up to that reality. And there's always one hard line for elites on the left and elites on the right, and it's money or any perceived threat to their money. And so when the left, and I mean, honestly, David Brooks is a bizarre person anyway, but let's say he's on the right or the old right, and you got the Raging Cajun on the quote unquote left. They are still in the same elite class. There's much less that divides them than the real people and the elites. The difference is just stark. And when the left starts sounding like, and I'm talking about the people, like when the left starts sounding like the actual populist left, the elites get nervous and they want to shut that down because they feel like suddenly like they are the upper class hiding in their castles while the people are at the gate with the pitchforks. And of course, we're way nicer than that in our modern times. We just want them to pay more in taxes and get things like healthcare for everyone or protection for workers who've been exploited to make oligarchs richer and richer. And the elites would still be rich even after paying more in taxes, but they imagine it all as a threat to their way of life. And they start saying things like, if you really like got to have a conversation like this with James Carville, like, you know, he might say, oh, I worked really hard for where I am or something. And the response to that is, of course, yeah, maybe you did, but you and everyone in your class, everyone at your income level did not do it alone. And you're not the only stakeholder in this country. And these turns now that these elites are having, especially with the Democratic elite saying, you know, suddenly they think Bernie was right, that is them seeing the writing on the wall to me. That's them trying to cover their own asses and sort of play acting as traitors to their class so that they don't get made irrelevant by what I hope is like the people's movement that is currently rising. But they're already irrelevant. They just don't realize it yet. And so they keep using their platforms to say, you know, this is good, this is bad, or, you know, yeah, now this is the time for X. But it's just because they are flowing with the wind, because that's who they are. That is their position in our political climate and world. And just like on another point, I realize not everyone, and maybe not even James Carville, is consciously thinking about this. James Carville might not be thinking, you know, I better swing to the left so that people don't come to my house and drag me out to throw me in the street or whatever. Like, I'm sure that's not it. But it's this subconscious thing that I think happens with people at that echelon. And mostly they're people who spent their lives tracking the horse races of politics, and they've just lost the damn plot. They don't understand that politics is not just a game. And it seems that they don't even pretend really anymore that it actually impacts real people and real people's lives. And they have the luxury of seeing it as a game because they're living the good life, speculating on the system that is actively harming people and not representing anyone who isn't a multimillionaire or a billionaire. And so the bottom line is that they're not made for this moment of upheaval, and they should all sit the fuck down. I don't want to hear anybody else's, oh, maybe we should do this now, or, oh, you know, Bernie was right. I don't care. You're all irrelevant. You're all irrelevant. You couldn't see the writing on the wall then. You're following the crowd now in a last desperate gasp. I'm done with you. I don't want to hear from you anymore.
While I was reading this article, I was picturing all three of those guys in a hot dog suit telling everyone that we got to get the guy who wrecked the hot dog shaped car into the window. Because, like, especially Carville and Rahm Emanuel, directly responsible for what the Democratic Party has not done and has done to impede progress, like directly responsible. David Brooks, less so, but he is very influential in those circles. That's who they are. They are the ones who did this. No one person has any responsibility for all of it, but they are part of the group of people who impede progress, telling us, yeah, we got to do something different. Yeah, shut up, go away.
Yeah.
And,
Go away.
you know, let's keep it dark. I think it was this article that also brought up like Larry Summers and a whole bunch of other people that came out to fight against Bernie Sanders in his presidential run. And if you'll look at who is in the Epstein files, it's the same group of people. I think the lesson from the Epstein files, despite how, you know, divided this country is that there is a class of people who do not actually care about politics. Like, kind of to what Amanda's point is, it is a game. They are all in the same cocktail circles. They're all in the same groups. They're all in the same, sometimes very dark rooms together. And
Yeah, look at the Epstein files. Jesus.
they're together doing horrible things, and it's to their benefit to pretend to be populist as long as things don't actually change.
Yep.
And that's what, Donald Trump is the best at, is saying things that not well-informed people believe is true and want to believe, because he ran on affordability before Zoran Mamdani ran on affordability. He didn't say it. He didn't have any plans. He didn't have any structure. He didn't have any way to implement policies that would make things more affordable. But he did say he's going to make things cheaper. And that's kind of what Carville and Rahm Emanuel and David Brooks are saying. They don't actually want to do the policies that would make things easier. They don't want to increase their taxes. They don't want to do any of those things. They just want to be left alone. And whether it's conscious or subconscious, they don't want to be dragged out in the street or whatever.
Or made irrelevant.
Just they don't want to be inconvenienced.
Mm-hmm.
When I was reading the first article and then this article, I started getting very angry and like specifically at the individual examples and the people, very similar to the points that the two of you made, especially Deon talking about these are literally people who have actively contributed to these things, actively supported awful things that then came to. And then I kind of took a step back and was like, it's not just reporters, it's not just politicians, it's also lobbyists. There are so many people who have benefited from bad decisions that were the wrong decision, that give it 10, 20 years, end up being on the right side of history. And I know the book is referenced in the article, one day everyone will have always been against this. And it's very true. It's very true that retroactively people are on the right side of history. But what made me feel better, and I don't know if this will make anyone else feel better, but removing the individual people and looking at the United States as the empire that it is, and really this is just a system that people will always benefit from. There will always be someone to take that seat, to push that talking point, to protect the empire, to protect, the colonization, the resource hoarding, and everything that our country actively participates in. And again, I don't know if this actually makes anyone feel better, because it's hard to be a part of the empire and also critique the empire. But I do think looking at it as a system is worthwhile, I'll say. Because if not, you will nitpick individual people instead of looking at the systemic issues, because it is systemic. There's a reason why there will be reporters who, were supporting Israel when the war began, who are now talking about the atrocities. Like, it doesn't matter about that individual reporter. It's the company, it's the money behind the wheels. It's the politicians who, again, it has to do with the money and the wheels of our empire and protecting the capital that we've accumulated. So I like examining it on the lower level, but I also like removing myself and like seeing this for what it is, which is, it's an empire. Yes, the empire protects itself. And they're just talking heads.
Of course, it's not just the centrists, milquetoast liberals who have been wrong all along. The people who are even more wrong are the ones who actually supported Trump. So The Atlantic compiled a bunch of these in the article, The Trump Backers Who Have Buyer's Remorse. So when it comes to Trump, I would say that it's not that progressives claim to have predicted any particular action of his because he is so chaotic. It's more that we've very consistently understood him as fundamentally a liar. And so we knew that anyone who took him at his word would be proven wrong. So in terms of predictions, that is definitely what the left has gotten right about Trump. And the article is, as I said, full of quickly disillusioned people not happy with Trump's second term, but there are these professionals who sort of stood out. So I'm just going to read this one quote because it sort of says what a lot of the examples say. Quote, Tucker Carlson, arguably the most influential media personality on the American right, interviewed Kurt Mills, the executive director of the American Conservative, a generally pro-Trump publication, basking in the glow of the inauguration, the two men enthused over what they described as Trump's commitment to a new policy of American restraint on the world stage. End quote. Insert laugh track. Like, either how wrong can you be, or, I mean, those dudes are just like some of the most cynical people in the country.
Yeah.
And like, do they really care? Do they just know that's what my audience wants to hear, and I'll rake in millions saying it? And then, you know, when the empire is going to roll on, and who actually gives a shit? Where they stand on anything is basically impossible to actually suss out. But what they say in public definitely does not end up being true anytime they try to understand or frame Trump to their audience or anything like that. And it's people like Tucker Carlson, regardless of what he actually believes, is why it's so understandable that like regular folks on the right, they're just living their lives and they're trying to understand how the government intersects with their lives and like what politics would be good for them or their community or the whole country, right? I mean, they could have all these kinds of thoughts. And then they hear Tucker Carlson say that and they're like, well, great, that sounds like my guy. He's going to have a restrained foreign policy and just like focus on making America great. Why? Like, you know, I mean, we hear that and, you know, pull our hair out because we know how silly it is to have thought that. But like, if you're just like, hey, I'm a conservative, so I'm going to listen to conservative opinion, and then you just like kind of take it at face value, of course you're going to be taken for a ride. Of course you're going to have no fucking idea what's about to happen in the world, because either the conservative commentators have no idea or they're lying to you. The article sort of sums this up, just saying, quote, frankly, those who fell for these mirages should have known better. Trump is no conventional politician. He relies on instincts forged in the worlds of show business and real estate, an entirely transactional actor with an unparalleled penchant for self-promotion and flim-flam, end quote. That sums it up. Like,
Yep.
why would anyone ever take Trump seriously and think like he's been a bullshitter his entire life, but it was all in the service of getting to this position so he can do the utmost selflessly for this country? Based on what?
So
I don't want to victim blame necessarily, but in this instance, when you are being conned over and over and over again,
Mm-hmm.
it's because you want to be conned. It's because you want to believe something. It's because you are not willing to do any self-examination. Like Jay said, don't include Tucker Carlson in this. He is super cynical. Since that article came out, he has been with Donald Trump laughing and smiling in the White House. He's part of the reason that inch of bullshit exists. This country doesn't talk about its own class/caste system. It doesn't talk about the mythology versus the reality of this country. There are so many reasons why it is difficult for the average Trump supporter to not see what's going on just based on propaganda and lies. This is the home of propaganda. This is probably one of, if not the most propagandized societies on planet Earth right now. So it is difficult for people to find truth, especially when you repeatedly go to liars for your source of information. But when you hear information that is not true from the same source over and over and over again, when it turns out to not be true and you keep going back to them, eventually it's your fault. You're responsible for that. So we're right. We were right about Trump. Yay. How do we move forward with these people who still refuse to believe that we were right about Trump? Like today, in 2026, 5 years as president, 9 years into him being basically a president of some of the people in America. Like some of the people just actually believe that he was president the entire time that Biden was president. How do we move forward with these people who refuse to accept that they were wrong? That's a question I've been struggling with and trying to figure out, and not there yet.
No. And it's only going to be if it hurts them personally, and maybe it's starting to kind of hit them in some corners. But yeah, I don't know what would break them other than direct harm from his policies and actions.
Before we get too far away from Tucker Carlson, I just want to bring up, these are not our opinions. These are the opinions of Fox News lawyers defending Tucker Carlson. Fox News lawyers, when Tucker Carlson worked at Fox News, argued in court, where you are legally bound to tell the truth, that no reasonable viewer should take Tucker Carlson's statements as factual. That was his defense for why he couldn't be held accountable for defamation, because the whole premise of his show was, I'm going to say lots of things that aren't true. I'm going to use hyperbole. I am not intended to be taken literally. That was their legal argument in court. So yeah, if you're going to keep watching that show, you want to be lied to.
So I forgot to actually conclude what I was saying about the empire, which is, I think Tucker Carlson, it's a perfect example, because the truth is that in the empire, there's space for these, what you would say are counterpoints, right? This liberal side of the argument and then this conservative side. But as we know, as good progressives, they're pretty much arguing for the same future. Liberals might have a little more human rights. But I think the thing about it being an empire that's so frustrating, and it's not just a system of news, it's also the defunding of public education, the defunding of any kind of community spaces where people can talk person to person. So where you seek out your information ends up being these journalists that have been uplifted and are put into mainstream consciousness, because the propaganda and the repeat lies and stuff like that, it seeps into your consciousness. And I think it takes critical thinking and examining facts to kind of delineate truth from what is being told to you. And I don't think that a lot of Fox News viewers, a lot of Tucker Carlson supporters necessarily have the critical thinking to examine the points and find the fallacies within his own arguments. Because as he lays out his arguments, I think you can very easily pull apart the things that he's not examining, or, bringing in context where it needs it. So unfortunately, the job of people ends up being like people movement from the ground up, of holding those accountable. Like, I would like to see Tucker Carlson not have a platform because he's deliberately lied and contributed to the propaganda machine. Him going back and forth about Trump. Of course, you're going to follow money where it goes. But what is the accountability for someone who's in his position? And I think, yes, he got removed from Fox News, but I mean, he's doing okay. He's still very much in
the media echo chambers are perfectly divided.
All right, so that's the middle left and the Trump right, who have been wrong about everything for the past decade. We're going to look at who was exactly right. So this is an article from the New Republic, The Americans Who Saw All This Coming But Were Ignored and Maligned. And this is talking about the classic Cassandra trope explained in the article this way. Quote, in Greek mythology, Cassandra was given the gift of prophecy, of seeing the future, but cursed that she would never be believed. Her name is sometimes used as a pejorative for an overacting alarmist, which, appropriately enough, misses the point. Cassandra was, after all, right, end quote. And I gotta say, I was born in the early 80s. I have never heard Cassandra used as a pejorative, and that just might be a weird blind spot of mine. They link in that statement to an example of Cassandra being used in that pejorative sense, and it is from, I think, a New York Times article from the 70s. So I'm wondering if culturally it shifted, where people caught on and were like, that's a really dumb thing to miss the point on. But at least going back, I'm surprised, not surprised at how wildly people would misinterpret that. Obviously, misogyny is baked in it to the absolute core. But anyway, I don't have that conception myself, just like how I grew up. I'm just like, oh yeah, Cassandra is the one who tragically isn't listened to, and we probably should listen to them. That's always been my understanding. So the premise of this article is that the journalist went around and talked to a bunch of people who kind of 30 something people, interviewed all of them for 30 minutes and just got a sense of like, when did you know Trump was a fascist and how did you know so early? So these are all people who are like, oh yeah, 2015 when he came on the scene, maybe even earlier, but definitely when he came down that escalator and started talking about Mexicans, like it was like pretty clear pretty early on. And so this article just describes a little bit about them. It says, quote, "The first thing to say about fascism's Cassandras is they're usually women. Not all women are Cassandras, most aren't, but most Cassandras are women. My sense is that Black Americans of either gender are likelier than whites to be Cassandras, and trans and non-binary people are heavily overrepresented within the group," end quote. And then just one other thing, like about their background, it says that, quote, "A very, very common trait, even for big blue city Cassandras, is having lived in a heavily Republican, deeply conservative area for a long period of time," end quote. So I find all of this interesting, but not at all confusing, right? Like these are the people, they're the most vulnerable to the problems that would arise under fascism and who have experience with conservatives having lived in conservative areas who would be the core of a fascist movement. Who could possibly be more qualified than those people to express their concerns about an emerging movement, which, look, like everyone recognized Trump as an aberration. He was not a George W. Bush conservative in the Republican Party. He was something else. And there was a lot of ink spilled on trying to figure out what he was. But these people, the Cassandras, who are like, oh, I know what that dude is,
Yeah.
were not listened to, even though their insights would come from such a deep well of understanding of exactly what they're talking about. Meanwhile, everyone else is like, I don't know. Let's try to figure it out. Let's go talk to conservatives in rural America and ask them if they'll just tell us what they are and what their movement is about. And if they don't say that they're Nazis, then that's probably not it.
Right.
So, Jay, I think I'm starting to understand that smugness that you said about being right, because the mention of
Wow.
non-binary and trans people being able to see through and representing the I was like, oh yeah, look at us.
That felt
Oh
good.
yeah.
Yeah.
But I think on a serious
For terrible
reasons.
Yeah.
But I think on a serious note, when we're talking about debates and we're talking about leftists being right, I think part of what I hate to not be included in the conversation is the risk assessment. What is it that we're risking if leftists happen to be right about this? Because generally, like what we're asking for is protections against that thing happening. So let's say we're worried about the crumbling of democracy as we've witnessed. We're generally just asking for protections to our democracy. Like, we're not asking for a huge thing. And I think in that risk assessment, like it makes sense to just go ahead and protect democracy because the risk of not doing anything is exponentially more threatening than protecting democracy. And it turns out it wasn't, as starkly under threat as we thought. So I
Mhm.
wish that we had more robust debates like that. Again, we can point to all the reasons why we don't, but I just think it's really important insight to giving consideration to which side of the argument bears more weight or should bear more weight.
Yeah.
When it comes to these Cassandras, like I think of James Baldwin and Martin Luther King as to like the why of Cassandras and why these, considered less than underserved populations are more likely to be Cassandras is because of not living in that layer of bullshit. Martin Luther King said there's two Americas. James Baldwin said like Black America doesn't have access to what white Americans have access to. It's this mythology that we are not a part of. We don't get to be a part of the mythological America. We get to be a part of the real America. That's why we can see it for what it is. And I'm calling myself a Cassandra in this. I come from a line of Cassandras. My mother hated Bill Cosby in the 80s when no one else hated Bill Cosby. She said, I can't tell you why, but there's something wrong with him.
Wow.
She was correct. Like that kind of thing. The people who have suffered, and I don't want to go into my mom's backstory necessarily, but like she had suffered some traumas in her childhood that led her to be aware of people like Bill Cosby, Donald Trump, and what they're actually about. If it's a protection and a safety mechanism that you must recognize danger, you are more likely to be aware of it when the danger will affect you. It is harder for a straight, white, Christian male in America to see things like Donald Trump being a problem because he's not a threat to them. He kind of speaks their language. He's trying to make America great for them. It's never said yet. We're getting pretty close. It hasn't been said explicitly yet, but that's what the project is. And if you don't have to examine it and you've never had to examine it your whole life, why would you be concerned about Donald Trump? So
Yeah.
being a Cassandra is being aware of danger. And if you're actually the danger, then why would you be aware of it? Because in our society, who are actually the danger to a lot of people? Like, who's the danger to trans people? Is it other trans people? No. It's people like Donald Trump. It's people who follow Donald Trump. Who's the danger in America in a racist, sexist society? Like, these things are the things we have to think about. Like, the reality of what America is and why some people were so much quicker to see what Donald Trump was. Because we're living in the reality of America and not the mythology.
So Deon, prepping for today's show, I sort of like dove down this rabbit hole a little bit and came across this, which is only buttressing what you're saying and sort of just saying it in different words. And apparently this is like a well-known phenomenon. Philosophers have been talking about it. And it says that philosophers argue that marginalized groups may actually have advantages in certain contexts when it comes to sort of clearly understanding the world in which they live. It says precisely because they must navigate both their own perspective and the dominant one in order to function in society, which gives them insight into systems that the dominant groups simply take for granted. Which reminds me of something I heard years ago about how, in the context of understanding race dynamics, Black people understand white people better than white people do because, the argument went, Black people have to navigate white people and white spaces and white emotions and white anger in order to coexist with the dominant white majority. And I mean, the context and history of the country makes it super clear of what happens when Black people historically don't fall in line with the white majority. They are taking their lives in their hands. And so Black people have to understand their own perspective and their own existence, but they also have to deeply understand white people and the white perspective. Not that there is a universal white perspective, but white people come at life from a certain angle and they're going to have some perceptions, they're going to have some assumptions, and I need to be aware of that for my own safety. And so it's really clear why marginalized people have to know more. It is for their own safety that they must know more than the sort of majority default group, which actually brings me to the thing I actually looked up, which is called the fallacy of default objectivity, otherwise known as the view from nowhere. It's the mistaken belief that traditionally dominant groups, straight white males in America, represent a sort of neutral, objective baseline, while marginalized groups are inherently biased by their identities. But it's not that the reverse is true. It is that everyone has their perspective. Straight white males have their perspective, just like any member of any group has their perspective as a member of a group, their individuality, all of it. But the perception, the fallacy that the members of the dominant group get to be seen as the default baseline, the sort of baseline objective group, is just based on confirmation bias and what is the great, like one of my favorite Latin logical fallacies, argumentum ad populum, the idea that, well, if a lot of people believe it, it must be true. I love that one because Bill O'Reilly made that literal argument against Jon Stewart in one of their debates, I think, like almost 20 years ago. He's like, more people watch my show, so I must be right. Yeah, dude, that's real sad that you're saying that out loud. But confirmation bias, people like to have things that they already believe be confirmed. And they say, well, a lot of people believe it, so there must be some legitimacy to it. And that creates the fallacy that, well, the default people, who are the people like me, and who are the majority, who believe a certain thing, well, they must be right. And if you're more marginal, both in your beliefs and your appearance, well, then no wonder you think differently. You're biased.
So when you were leading up to that, what you were describing about how Black people are living in a white world and understand them better than others, I mean, you can say something very similar for how women are very, very attuned and aware to men and what kind of threat they may pose or may not pose. And I know, speaking of Cassandras and mothers, like my mom, when Trump came on the scene, she was like, I've met that guy many times in my life. He is an archetype of a type of person that was more common in his generation, obviously. Not that they don't exist in other generations, but more common. And she just was like, I know him. I know his whole deal. And her friends said the same thing because yeah, they've had experience living in a male dominated world, right? Especially at the time that they were growing up or in their 20s and 30s and establishing themselves as adults. And so I certainly felt like, I don't know that I knew anyone like Donald Trump, but I certainly felt the warning signs deep inside and well, he is just an obvious threat and a big red blaring warning sign. And I think what I probably misjudged when he was first running in the primary, I was concerned when he was running in the primary because he mixed in populist ideas with horrifying racism. And I was like, oh no, people are going to excuse or ignore or, just like brush away the racism because the whole country is freaking racist. And they're going to vote for him because of the populist messages. I mean, he was even throwing out universal health care in the primaries. I mean, it was unnerving to see something like that. And I thought that's how he might do it, right? And I believed him. I think a lot of supporters obviously didn't want to or just didn't believe him, or they say they didn't believe him because they're hiding their own racism or something about, the things he was saying about Mexican people, or, I mean, he said something terrible about literally everyone. So I think it was the point for me that really tipped things over was I think it must have been in 2016 because he was having big stadium rallies at that time. And I was reading some coverage about one of his earliest ones, and I was looking at pictures from the crowd. And I'm looking at these people who are jubilant, just seething with excitement and fervor, and their signs are awful, and they're cheering and screaming when he says the most vile, violent, sexist, racist stuff, right? And I remember I think we were visiting Jay's family at the time, and I just looked up and I just said, I think he's going to win. And everybody kind of scoffed at me because at that time, like, nobody really believed that he was going to win. Everyone thought this is a clown, this is a buffoon, and so it was kind of like, ugh, no. But that was a moment for me where I was like, oh, I see it now. Because even though I understood that the country was deeply racist and we had just been living through the early days of Black Lives Matter and all of that, I still thought that people would vote for economics first and not necessarily vote for the racism. And of course, I understand now, and like this is just a sign of my personal political evolution, that the people were ready, very primed and ready to vote for the racism, the sexism, just the general bigotry. And I think up until that point, I had underestimated people's ability to have that be a feature and not the bug.
This is like the most profound insight that any of these Cassandras are quoted as saying in this article. And I'm just really impressed with this person's logic. I hope that they really thought this in real time and aren't just editing themselves to make themselves look smarter in retrospect. But anyway, this is very solid logic. It says, quote, Trump had led Republican primary polling as early as 2011 based on his then recent embrace of birtherism, the claim that Barack Obama was not born in the United States. And then this is one of the Cassandras speaking, quote, this was telling me that the Republican Party was open to racism as a fundamental part of the attitude and the thinking of their leadership. But because the vehicle for that was such a ridiculous claim, To me, that meant that the party was also open to ridiculous claims about other groups of people, about politics, essentially a non reality based politics. And that kind of politics is, of course, going to be an authoritarian politics. End quote. I would not claim to have connected those dots as clearly that long ago.
Well, that's what, so when we were talking about the groups of people that tend to have a larger representation amongst Cassandras, I was thinking what keeps people out of the group? Because there are people who voted for Trump who are LGBT, who are disabled, who are marginalized in
Mhm.
some kind of capacity that it negatively impacts. And I think that's why the fear mongering that Trump offered was able to kind of put an extra layer of film over the eyes on some of these marginalized groups. I don't think that they necessarily saw Trump as benign, but the threat of what he was speaking to outweighed that ability to see through the bullshit, to see the actual threat that Trump poses. So, I mean, that was just a little, like, as Dion had talked about fear, and as you were talking, Jay, that's something that just popped in my head, that, like, maybe the fear is a little more flexible, and, like, you can kind of quash that a little bit if you think there's something more threatening, which makes sense to, like, human survival and everything.
I mean, it is very easy to internalize white supremacy.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Very recent example, the video that circulated of an ICE agent with a Spanish accent asking someone with a Spanish accent where they're from, and I need you to arrest you because of your accent. Like, it is easy to imagine yourself as a part of this larger dominant group because that's its own safety. That is another form of taking care of yourself. Like, I'm just out for myself. So I'm going to deport these other people who have slightly thicker accents than I do because that's how I'll respond to it, as opposed to saying, no, this is a problem and we need to do something about this problem. I'll just go along to get along.
Well, and you can view yourself as part of the in group. That doesn't mean that the group sees you as part of it.
Absolutely.
All of which brings us to the anti-alarmists. We've heard from the Cassandras, and of course, the brick wall that they ran into was not the pro-Trumpers. It was the anti-Trump, anti-alarmists. So here's a sampling. Quote, hysteria and sanctimony are proving to be a terrible strategy for dealing with Donald Trump, wrote William Watson in 2017. Simon Jenkins concurred in The Guardian. With every sneer, liberals just make Trump stronger. The solution, according to Josh Barrow, was to just shut up. He said, liberals can win if they stop being so annoying, end quote. And the article continues, annoying, sneer, hysteria, hysterical, moralizing, breathless. I call commentators like this, who are not pro-Trump, but are very against the Cassandra read of him, anti-alarmists. They are encountering the Cassandra song as female. That annoys them, and they dismiss it on that basis. And it goes on saying, quote, anti-alarmists invariably conflate talking in a calm tone with being rational. Any expression of fear or anger from Cassandras is proof they're not to be taken seriously. But in some circumstances, fear and anger are the rational reaction, end quote. So now we have layers, right? We have these people who are not inside the dominant group of the country. They're mostly not straight white males. So there is the default objectivity bias that makes these people who are more marginal seem less reliable. And then when they have opinions that, regardless of how founded in facts and experience they are, if their natural and correct response is fear and anger, then that is just another, checkbox for why to not take them seriously. So I'm going to argue, without having researched it, it is not an accident, even going back to Greek mythology, that Cassandra is a woman. The story of that myth, it is not incidental that she was a woman in that story and that her concerns being ignored, being a fundamental part of her curse, is like so deeply embedded in the patriarchy that runs the world that it has been running for thousands of years. So it's not surprising. It doesn't make it very much less frustrating.
Look, after the election, what was the first major protest we had? It was the Women's March. That wasn't incidental. Women clearly saw, I mean, obviously not all women, because a shocking amount of white women voted for Trump, but a lot
Hashtag
of
not all
women
women.
realized, hashtag not all women, but a lot of women realized, okay, this is the real deal. Suddenly, our rights are actually on the chopping block. The threat has been there for a long time, but this is what would make it all possible. And they were right. And I know that the pink pussy hats and all of that gets a lot of, and I feel the same way. It's a little cringe. It feels a little like that wasn't the right tone or something. I don't know. I've tried to analyze this, but I don't even, it might be my own internalized misogyny. Who the fuck knows? But clearly all of that was seen as an overreaction. Like, it was one of the biggest protests we've ever had in the history of the country. And yet very quickly after that, it was sort of dismissed. And I mean, I don't know, like, can you draw a straight line from the dismissal of women screaming, oh my God, this is going to harm everyone, to the manosphere bullshit we're in right now? I mean, you might be able to. There was a lot going on then, like Me Too. It was just after that. But like, there was a lot of women saying we're tired of this and we're going to speak out and we're going to start making moves politically and organize. And then there was a backlash, right? And I sometimes wonder what happened to all that energy. And I think it just got anti-alarmist suppressed. They made all those people who came out all over the country look like hysterical people. To some degree, that worked. And so that momentum got stifled. It got stifled real hard. I mean, it's not like there aren't still movements and, energy, but from that first term on, something shifted. There was definitely a concerted effort to make people who were part of that stage of the movement look like cartoon characters of themselves. And there's a lot of misogyny in there. And I saw it, at the time. And I think we're still kind of dealing with the repercussions of it now.
And to piggyback on that, the 2020 protest after George Floyd, they still talk about how violent they were because some buildings got damaged, some cars got damaged, because those people are violent. Those people are out of control. You can't trust them. There's something wrong. As if anger wasn't the right response to watching someone get murdered in broad daylight. As if anger isn't always a valid response to watching someone get murdered in broad daylight. It's happened again, and now rightfully or strategically, maybe, a lot of people are being told in Minnesota, you don't want to respond the way they want you to respond. You don't want to be too angry. You don't want to be too aggressive, because they'll come back with anger. But that's what they're going to do anyway.
Yeah.
Like, that part is always left out, that the response from the state is always going to be violence. And it's not a poor reflection on you if you are visibly upset, angry, or sad about things that make people upset and sad. And that term, you got triggered, that got weaponized. If you were in a debate and you got upset about something horrific and you got upset about it, you lost. You got triggered. You're triggered by something horrific. What's wrong with you, coward? That's misogyny at work. And it is used to make your righteous anger or feelings of sadness seem lesser, because
dilute it.
Because obviously the only right stance is stoicism. Like, you only can be calm and cool and collected unless you're a white straight male conservative. Then you can be angry. That's okay. That's accepted.
You can have a lot of emotions if you're a white male Christian conservative.
And that's totally fine. But anybody else, you don't get the full spectrum of emotions.
What you two just said reminds me of this CNN clip that's been going around. I don't know if anyone saw it, but they're talking about the Epstein files. And one of the male commentators is on there and he talks about, what did he say? Don't get your britches in a bundle or something very.
Panties in a bunch?
It's not panties in a bunch, but it's very similar. We all
Okay.
understand what he meant by it. But he was talking about them not pushing for the Epstein files to be released more and that they're breaking the law. And the way he says it is so dismissive, so like, yeah, they should follow the law, but we don't need to get that upset about it. And,
Yeah.
the woman commentator, she immensely meets the moment with righteous anger at the fact that we're being so cavalier. Like, you don't want us to be upset about people like molesting children and essaying and everything that's in the Epstein files. You don't want us to be upset about that. That's not anything to get our, like, she kind of mocks him in a way. But I thought that is how we should respond to the downplaying of human emotion that
Yeah.
that comes with atrocities, because that is exactly what this is. We are talking about children who were trafficked. Like, we're talking about a global sex ring. Like, it should absolutely come with fury, with the injustice, with every emotion that, she put on display. And the fact that that's viewed as weakness or like that she's in the wrong. That's so, that's
Yeah.
hilarious. I hope that we're coming around that, like, even that interaction taking place, that the viewership was more on her side than his. I hope that is the result.
I mean, gotta hope. But I mean, right now, I was just reading about the new acronym, which it's meant to do exactly what we're talking about right now. Awful, affluent white feminist, urban liberal, or something like that. I forget the whole fucking thing. But it's a way to target white women in particular. And it's meant to take the teeth out of the fact that white women are out there in Minnesota right now. A white woman was murdered by ICE for trying to stand up for what was right. And they need to take the teeth out of that, because if they don't, some other white women might get the idea that maybe it's right to stand up to injustice and go out and defend their streets and neighborhoods and neighbors. And so mock them, tear them down, call them names, which is obviously Trump's MO from the day he walked out and announced himself. He was name calling. And unfortunately, what they've learned is that it sometimes works. And so how do we fight back? Well, we just keep doing what we need to do and say, fuck you.
I was like, name call, clearly.
Yeah, right.
Come up with better names.
Yeah, that's right.
So I'm going to close out this article on this last point, but it ties into a conversation we had recently. We're talking about generational humor and the ideas of cynicism and earnestness and cringe came up quite a lot in that discussion and then resonated so much when I read this passage. It says, quote, Cassandras make their arguments in simple and straightforward ways. They're earnest. They don't bury their politics in 12 layers of eye-rolling irony or pad it out with jargon or clever-sounding phrases. All this sincerity would become negatively associated with femininity throughout the Trump era. There would be a trend toward considering earnestness cringe, to use Alex's words, one of the people being interviewed. She told me, quote, I got a little sinking feeling when cringe became a common epithet. It's like, do we like the alternative? Which finally brings us to our last article, The Resistance Libs Were Right, a recent op-ed piece in the New York Times, which just kind of reiterates what we've been saying. It says, quote, if people had predicted back in 2024 precisely what Trump's return to the White House was going to look like, I suspect they'd have been accused of suffering from Trump derangement syndrome. But the shrillest of resistance libs have always understood Trump better than those who make a show of their dispassion. As the heterodox writer Leighton Woodhouse put it on X, the hysterical pussy hats were right. Of course they were. From the moment he descended his golden escalator, Trump's message, the emotional core of his movement, has been textbook fascism. And then it goes on and says, quote, if Trump didn't always act on his most fascistic predilections in his first term, it was because he was restrained by the establishment types around him. Mark Esper, Trump's former defense secretary, said that Trump repeatedly broached the idea of bombing Mexico. In 2019, Trump canceled a meeting with the Prime Minister of Denmark after she refused to entertain the idea of selling him Greenland, end quote. Again, it's not just that progressives are right because we have a framework for understanding the world. We also just pay attention. Like, I knew that stuff about Trump. I heard the stories about Trump going to Europe and being confused while standing in a World War I or II cemetery and having to ask someone, remind me which one of these are the good guys. Were we the good guys in this war or the bad guy? Like, because he's actually a fascist. That's actually his core. And he doesn't think that American ideals are anything special or something to be lived up to. In fact, he says the exact opposite. He says that soldiers who died in war were suckers, not even because they fought for America and America's wrong. He's just like, they like thought about something other than themselves. That's it. That's as far as his thinking goes. He just thinks like, if you're not out for number one and you end up getting killed in the process, you're an idiot. Full stop. That's his full thinking. And I just feel the need to bring it up whenever it seems relevant. You know, his first or second wife said in an interview decades ago that he keeps the book of Hitler's speeches on his bedside table.
Yeah. Yeah, we knew
Like,
that way
where
early
do you
on.
think he learned to do what he's doing? He studied up, and he didn't study up in like a, well, Hitler's a really bad guy, but he had some good ideas and strategies for manipulating the population. No, obviously not. He's like, this guy makes some good points, and because I'm super racist, I think that we should bring that here. It's not complicated. It's really not complicated. And if you think it is, then you're overthinking it. That's the problem. You're actually looking for ways that it could be not as simple as it is, but it's actually really straightforward and simple.
There's still way too many arguments about whether or not he's fascist today, currently. Like, that's still happening, but you know, it's coming around. He let Zoran Mamdani acknowledge that he's a fascist to his face in the Oval Office.
Just go ahead and say it.
Yeah, he doesn't care. I'm not sure what it would take for some people to see it or some people to admit it about themselves. But I know that a lot of people, especially with like him, is he a racist? Of course he's a racist. Obviously he's a racist. But he hasn't said the N-word live into a microphone. So we'll never know, right? And even then, there will be people who say, well, he slipped or whatever. Not that big a deal. Like, the goalpost will always move for people who want to believe what he's saying. Donald Trump always, forever, we've said it on this show, many people have said it, is a symptom, not the actual problem. He's a symptom of a deeper problem in America. And this deeper, systemic, racist, misogynist, colonialist society that we have never come to terms with and will never come to terms with if we can't acknowledge it. Like this whole Greenland piece, like taking Greenland. There have been some people, like I'm doing research for, you know, the Best of the Left podcast, wherever you get your podcast, for the next episode about Greenland and some other issues. But there's some real argument that if he decided to militarily go after Greenland, that there would be no pushback from the military because they have plans in place and believe it to be strategically valuable too. It's a part of America to take territory. Why is Alaska a state in this country? Why is Hawaii a state in this country? Why is this country a country? It just goes along with it. Trump is a buffoon on the surface, but I think that Hitler speech book and what Jay said is really under-discussed. Is that, yes, he's a clown. Yes, he's ridiculous. But he's also really good at being a con artist. What he did to become a Republican nominee is watch hours and hours and hours of Fox News. That's what he did. He took in, what are the rubes watching? What are they like? I'm going to be that. I'll be silly and whatever, and there will always be plausible deniability because that's what he's great at too. He'll say vague things that can be interpreted in multiple different ways because he is a great con artist. I think people on the left are really guilty of underestimating him. I think we still are. We call him crazy. We call him like he's losing his mind. And those things are probably true. But he's very capable. He's run for president 3 times. He's won twice. He could have won the last time if it wasn't for a pandemic. He's good at this. And we have to acknowledge
it's second
that he's
nature.
good at it. Yeah, I don't even know if it's, I think it's his skill that he actually has honed. It's the one thing he tries at, to be a con artist. He is good at it. And I don't think it's just natural. I think it's something he actually works at. And
well, he did have Roy Cohn to train him up for sure. But I what I mean by second nature is I think it is in his nature because he is, a full-on malignant narcissist, and because he does not care whoever he runs over in his way, that it's easy for him, I guess is what I'm saying. He can study up, but it's real easy. That independent study goes down smooth because he just can absorb all of that and roll with it really quickly. I mean, the trial balloons alone, he learned really early that he can just say something out loud and then just see what the reaction is. And you don't even have to poll anyone. You can just get a gauge of, did people cheer and froth at the mouth? Okay, that seems like they like that. I mean, that's what I mean. Is he's just naturally good at being awful, at being the con artist, at screwing people over.
I'm going to agree with you on that one.
All right, so to wrap up, we go back to the initial article. The left is always right too early. And they conclude this way, which is as good of what we would have said anyway. So it says, quote, when leftists say that military support for Israel needs to be immediately withdrawn and Benjamin Netanyahu put on trial, or that private ownership of the healthcare industry is a historic horror that needs to be abolished, or that we've got to end the production and use of fossil fuels as soon as possible, people ought to pay attention. Those are also correct conclusions, just as don't enslave people was in the 1850s. This many centuries in, maybe the world will listen to people who've been right all along while there's still time to make a difference, end quote. And remember, the point being, we're not just right. We have the best system for coming to conclusions because we care far less about pre-existing ideology, ideological junk that clouds perspectives. So it doesn't mean we're infallible. It just means we have a much better self-correcting mechanism that helps keep us on the right track, and our general sense of what we are trying to look for, what we are attuned for, is looking farther ahead. We're always looking for more people to expand the circle to grant rights to. We're looking for, who's getting the short end of the stick so that we can help them. That's who we're focused on. And so, of course, we're going to come to better conclusions faster, not because we're special, not because we're magic, but because we have a system and a way of looking at the world that is more aligned with finding truth faster than other groups. So it seemed important to, say that today over and over again, and we should say it more often generally to beat that drum. No, I'm not kidding. The left really, really, really should be paid attention to more often. And whenever we are dismissed, people should read that list to them. You say my perspective is too far left? Let me read the list of things over the past 500 years that have been considered too far left, and now challenge you to, are you sure you want to stay on that side of history? Are you sure that you want to argue against universal health care? You sure? That hasn't worked out for people in the centuries past.
I said this before, but I'll say it again. It's a people first approach. And I want that to be the next candidates, the next Democratic candidates tagline. And I want them to fucking mean it. People first.
And that's why Gavin Newsom 2020, whatever.
Shut up. No. You ruined it, Deon.
Damn it. I'm sorry. You know what? I'm going to be I've come around. I am going to be insufferable going forward. We're right, they're wrong. You shut up and listen to us. Like that's what I'm gonna do from here on out.
Yeah, let's just do that.
Yeah.
Who cares, right?
Yeah.
Let's just go
Not
for it.
people
Let's
first.
just be insufferable.
My team first.
Like,
That's what I want.
I just go on record as being the first person to jump aboard of Jay's thinking, and now you two are. I think we have a movement here.
You're being insufferable about being insufferable, Erin.
Took an hour and a half and we got a
Look,
movement.
if you three are the only minds that get changed today, then I'm calling that a win. All right, if you want to chime in, you can text or leave a voicemail at 202-999-3991, send an email to j@bestofleft.com, or write to us on Signal at bestofleft.01. Thanks for listening, and remember that this is all really happening, so continue to be decent, act like what you do and say matters, and do what matters most.